Everyone, it's David Bombal back with a very, very special guest. Heath, welcome.
Hey, David, how you doing?
Very well. Heath, it's great to have you on the channel. Been hoping to have you here for a long time. Really happy that it's finally happened. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself? I mean, you're really well known in the cybersecurity space, so really don't need much of an introduction, but quick introduction and then tell us what you're going to be covering. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, so great to be here. Thank you for having me. My name is Heath Adams. I am the CEO of TCM Security and the co-founder of Breachpoint. At TCM Security, we do education and consulting. So on the education side, we teach a lot of different hacking concepts and techniques through various classes. We do certifications, all that fun stuff. Consulting side, anything you want broken into, we'll break into it for you, or try to at least. But, we do a lot of ethical hacking that started, or where we kind of started at and where we've kind of grown from. Breachpoint is a defensive company to kind of counter all the offensive side we do over at TCM Security. And today we're going to be covering some of the training that we have, which this is from our practical ethical hacking course and our Active Directory live trainings that we do. But today we're going to be looking at Active Directory and how you can hack into it.
I love it. I mean, I've been through your training. Fantastic. My team have been through your training and they love it. I don't want to get into like a war between different training providers, but I will say this. My opinion is your stuff's fantastic. Really like your training, Heath. So looking forward to, seeing what you've got to show us today.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
So Heath, without further ado, man, got to show us this demo. Top 5, is it? Top 5 hacks in 80?
Yep, top 5 hacks in 80. So let's go ahead and cover really quickly what our lab looks like. Just so if you want to go download this, follow along at home, you're welcome to. We are running on Kali Linux. This is Sys 2023.2. Any latest and greatest of Kali will do. I've got a couple of Windows machines here. So this one is called the Punisher. This one is Spider-Man. And then we have a Windows server that is running as our Active Directory. So if you're not familiar with what Active Directory is, this is kind of like I like to call it like a phone book for AD. Yeah. It does identity access management. So basically we can log in with our users, we can control our users, we can put them into different groups, we can apply policies, change passwords, permissions, all that fun stuff, all within Active Directory. And this is so important in learning this, not just from like a pen tester standpoint, but just from a security defense standpoint, because 95+% of Fortune 1000 uses Active Directory. Mostly everybody out there is using Active Directory. And so you're going to come across this as a pen tester. If you're working in IT, you're likely going to come across this as a defender or even an admin. So understanding Active Directory and how this setup that we have here is straight out of the box. We did not make anything vulnerable on purpose. We did not do anything. This is all just how it ships. So Microsoft, thank you. You keep us in business. And so we're just going to show you. It's a feature. Sorry. It's not a bug. It's a feature. Yeah. So, and that's exactly what we call them. So you're going to see a bunch of features of Active Directory today that are vulnerable inherently just by setting up Active Directory. So
Heath, let me just stop you. You mentioned labs. Does that mean you've got online labs, or can people rent labs, or how do the labs do if they want to follow what we're doing?
Yeah, so with our classes, the labs are actually local and downloadable. So what we do is we do that for a couple of reasons. One, it saves money. You don't have to buy a lab. And two, we do value the experience of actually you building this out, because you get to see what an administrator does and goes through when you're doing this. So very valuable there. We do have online labs with our live training. So if you took an Active Directory hacking class with us, this would already be pre-built for you. So we do have this video. It is how to build an Active Directory hacking lab online. And so it kind of covers, it does cover everything that you need to do. So it talks about the different builds that you have and where to go find them, how to actually do this and install this. And you can see it's a 48-minute video. But if you want to get this set up before you actually start following along with this video, you can absolutely go do this, get everything set up, and this should get you good to go for the hacking experience.
I just want to say, Heath, I mean, before we get into the video, you have both video training, which this YouTube video is based on, but you also do live training, right? You mentioned it briefly, but I mean, do you actually present the live training?
Yes, depending on what the class is. But I teach OSINT, I teach Active Directory, we teach for our certifications as well, like PJPT, PMPT. So we have different live classes depending on the month that covers a lot of this stuff, and Active Directory is one of those classes.
Heath, I get asked this all the time, and I'm pretty sure you must get this question every single day, right? Where do I start?
Foundations are important first. So what I think of foundations is a lot of people want to jump in the deep end of hacking, but you got to think about it like a house. If you don't build a strong foundation, everything else can crumble. So what we want to look at is A+, Net+, Security Plus equivalent knowledge. So help desk, basic networking knowledge, basic security knowledge that goes really far. You don't have to go get those certifications by any means, but just knowing the equivalent of those does help. We also use Linux, as you're going to see throughout this whole process. We use Linux a lot. So if you're not comfortable with Linux, learning Linux would help as well. And then understanding a programming language does not mean you have to be a developer, but you're going to go out there, especially during real engagements, and you're going to maybe download code from the internet. You need to know what that code is doing. You need to be able to read through it and understand it to make sure that you're not running something against a client environment that is potentially malicious. So those are kind of our pillars that we have. And as we go through it, we don't have all the pillars on our platform, though we are working through getting some of the more basic, like the help desk type training. We do have some of the foundational courses as you go through here. So we do have a Linux 101, we have a Python 101, we have Python 201, Rust, so a bunch of different programming options, Linux as well. And then once you're through kind of those foundations, you feel comfortable, then we start through the offensive security side. So practical ethical hacking is where you're seeing a lot of this Active Directory attacks come from. This is our core foundational course for learning to be like me and be a hacker. And this is where I would start people once you have those foundations ready.
But what I love about that course, right, is you cover Python, you cover basic networking already in that course.
We do, yes. So if you go into the course curriculum on here, we make sure that those foundations are covered, even if it's just a refresher for you. So we call this a refresher, but we do cover, hey, what's TCP, UDP, three-way handshake, the OSI model, the things that you should know before you're getting into this. And then, hey, yes, Linux, Python. Before we even touch hacking, you're probably 4 or 5 hours in the course. Yes, we want to jump into hacking, but these foundations are so important before we go into it. And it's I cannot stress that enough. You need the foundations before you just jump into the deep end.
Being like, I'm sure most people, I don't want to wait, right? Could I jump straight into this, or do I need to go and do Network Plus, A Plus, all that stuff first?
So you can. You're going to be lost, and you're going to find yourself, I think, because I have the tendency to do that too.
Yeah,
I just want to go jump into the deep end and see what happens. And sometimes people can manage, but other times, you're going to find yourself doing so much more research on things that you don't know about, and it feels like you're just going to slug along, and that could create a bad experience for you as well. And if you have a negative experience, you may not want to continue learning this. So the more you know from a foundational standpoint, the easier the course is going to be to go through, and the better overall success you're going to have, better experience you're going to have. And so I would highly recommend doing the foundations first.
So do those foundations, then take this course, right? And then I can get a cert, or is it just a course?
No, we do have certifications as well. Let me bring that up really quick. Okay, from a certification standpoint, we do have several associated with this course. So is the PJPT. So PJPT is that junior penetration tester, and that kind of gets your feet wet, and it's actually all Active Directory based. So you are dumped into an Active Directory environment similar to what we're doing today, and you are tasked with compromising our domain with everything that you learned. And so you have 2 days to do that. You have 2 days to write a report, and you get your certification. Big brother, maybe big sister to this is the PMPT. And so this is our network penetration tester exam. And this is a 5-day exam. This one does come with more courses. So it does come with this practical ethical hacking course, and you do learn about all this. But it does come with an OSINT, or open source intelligence course. It comes with an external pen test playbook course. And it comes with 2 escalation courses. So Windows and Linux privilege escalation courses as well. So overall, around 50 hours of content. What that does, though, is this is a 5-day exam where you're not just on an internal, you're actually on an external pen test. So outside looking in, you have to conduct OSINT, find information that's out there living on the web that actually lets you into our network. And then you have to hack an internal environment, compromise that, write a report. And once you deliver the report, you actually have to spend 15 minutes with our team going over your report and your findings, because that's what you're going to do in the real world. So you have to conduct a pen test, write a report, give a debrief, and then you get certified. So this is more of the bigger exam, a little bit more complex, and does come with practical ethical hacking as well, but does build upon other foundations of hacking in there.
I think for a lot of people who's starting out, right, getting the cert is one thing, but will it help me get a job?
Yeah, so good question. This is on quite a few job postings nowadays. Yeah. So it's one of those things that we started out. We try to be different because nobody was really doing it practical like anybody really. Yeah. And so we went out there, made this practical exam, and industry started adopting it. So we've been on McDonald's, Citibank, Paramount, Leidos. There's a bunch of major Fortune 100 companies that have put PMPT on their job descriptions. I'm going to pull up my handy dandy slide so I can give you some visuals, and then we're going to get hands-on and take a look at this. So
great.
From our standpoint, we have our first attack, and this is the most common, one of the most easy attacks we've got. This one is called LLMNR Poisining, or what's called Link Local Multicast Name Resolution. And so this used to be also known as MBTNS. They're also phasing this out eventually into some new protocol. But basically, all these protocols do, as Microsoft and Windows versions change, is just do something in case DNS is failing. So DNS is just doing a name resolution. And in this point, we're just doing some sort of name resolution. We'll take a look at that in a picture here in a second. But what's really happening here is this is sending over information about a user, and it's sending over that user's password hash too when it's sending over this protocol. And a better way to show that is to actually click through. So let's show you some examples here. Let's say that we have a victim that is just on a network, any regular user, and they're trying to connect to a file share, and that file share is called hackme. In this instance, they type in hackm because they make a typo. And the server doesn't know what hackm is. DNS is failing here. And so we're going to try to send out this broadcast message to the entire network and say, does anybody know how to get me to this file share? And us being malicious, man in the middle, attacker in the middle position, will say, yep, I sure do. So we're going to do what's called responding to that. We're going to use a tool called Responder. So we're going to respond to that message, and we're going to say, I know, just come on, give me your information. Give me that hash, give me that username, all that fun stuff, and I'll get you to where you need to be. And so the victim will send that over to us, and we capture the hash. If the hash is weak, we can go take that hash offline and crack it. And now we have access to that user's account. And so what that kind of looks like from an attacker perspective is we use this tool called Responder. And we're sitting here listening for a lot of things. Like you could see in here, it's LLMNR, MBTNS, the old protocols, DNS, DHCP. We can do a lot of different things that we won't cover right now. But basically, we're sitting attacker in the middle, waiting for something to happen that we respond to. And it doesn't have to be a file share. That's just one example. There are all kinds of events that happen within a network. So just keep that in mind as well. I'm going to force this, since we don't have real traffic on our network. In a real pen test or real engagement, we just run this tool, we let it sit, we go do other things, we wait for hashes to pop up. Here, we're going to force it because there's nobody else in the network. So we're going to just point this at ourselves and get this attacker to, or this victim to connect to our attacker. What that's going to look like is you're going to get a fancy hash to come through. This is what is called an NTLM v2 hash, the second protocol of this, or second version of this. And if that password is weak enough, as in password 1, for example, we will be able to crack that and compromise this user. So in a real world engagement, we see this all the time. Weak passwords will lead to this attack happening along with LLMNR being an enabled protocol within the network. So let's take a look at that in our real labs.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because on YouTube, you always get this pushback, right? This is not real world. So it's great to get your feedback. This is actually stuff that you're seeing out there, right?
Oh, this is very real world. Yeah, absolutely. We see this all the time. So I'm just going to authenticate here into a victim machine. So just imagine this is a workstation on a network, and I'm going to open up my file share here. On this side, we're going to use this tool called Responder. So just sudo responder. And then we're just going to give this, get rid of that. We're going to give it verbose here. And then we have to give the interface. So we're going to use interface of Ethernet 0, which is what I'm on. I probably should grab that IP address as well, which is 138.134. Okay, so all we're doing now is we're just listening to events. So here's all your poisoners, here's the different servers that it's listening on. So it does a lot more than just LLMNR. That's kind of the main thing that we're after here. Okay, so if we go in here and we just kind of 192.168.138.134, hit enter. It's going to prompt here for authentication. Again, we're forcing this. It's not real, but this is what you see come flying through on the other side. Is you get these hashes. And so we've got an IP address of where it came from, 138.137. We have the domain that we're on here for Active Directory, and the user is fcastle. And then we get this wonderful thing right here, which is that hash. So all we need to do is copy this. I'm going to hit Control-C because I'm done with the tool for now. And then I'm just going to put this into a hash file. So if I have a hash file, I'm just going to remove it. It doesn't look like I do. Cool. So we're just going to nano one then. All right, I'm going to paste that in there. Save it. And if we cat that hash out really quick, should see that indeed that hash is in a file. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take this and we're going to try to crack this password. And so we're going to use a tool called Hashcat to do that. We can use other tools. There's something like John the Ripper is another good tool for this. I prefer Hashcat.
Yeah.
My big advice here is I'm running this in a virtual machine. Don't run Hashcat or password cracking in a virtual machine. I'm sure
Yeah.
you've covered this many times, David.
Yeah.
But you're using your CPU in this instance instead of your graphics card or your GPU. So you want to make sure you're on your base OS, whatever that may be, when you're doing password cracking, or it's going to be very slow. So don't follow me in this one. But just for this example, it's going to be easy enough. So here we're going to do a -M of 5600. That's our module. That module is going to correlate directly, and we can actually prove that. We just do a hashcat help, and then we just grep on this NTLMV2.
Yep.
This is a good way to search for different modes for hashes that you're wanting to crack. Here you can see NTLMV2.
I was going to say hashcat isn't really intuitive and for people who start out, right?
No, because if you do a hashcat -- help, you get this long, I mean, it's just like
crazy long, yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy long. So being able to grep search through it, or there's a great web page, like Hashcat has a great help page that you can just go in and look and say, hey, what's the hash? And a lot of it's just like looking through it, or there's tools like Hash Identifier, where you can dump a hash into it and see if you can pull a hash back out of it. So you've got options, but Hashcat by itself, no, it's very overwhelming and takes some practice and learning to actually get it to get the syntax down. So we're going to do a hashes.txt on this one. Actually, I might have just called it hash.txt.
Yeah.
And then we're going to provide a word list. So user, share, word list. And then I'm just using what's called rocku.txt. So basically, mode is NTLMV2. We're going to use the hash we grabbed in a word list. This Rocku word list is a very, very, it's an old word list. It comes default with Kali. It's like you use this as like the very baseline of everything. Hopefully you don't find a password in this, but you've got a really weak password if you found it in this list. We hit enter on this. It's going to cook for a second, and hopefully, which it did already, it found the password. So you can see that password 1 came through, and we now have compromised that user. So I like to just come in here and just say, I know F Castle now has password 1. Easy enough. So that is an example of an LLMNR attack.
He's just getting your real world experience, right? In the real world, would you use Rocku, or is there another password list that you use, or do you use brute force? What do you do?
Fantastic question, and I'm glad you asked. So here's my strategy. I'm going to break it down a little bit. I would start with Rocku as a very, very quick baseline. If it's in there, great. There's this actual new word list out there. It's called Rocku 2021.txt. That one is fantastic. It is, just to put in comparison, Rocku itself is around 600 megabytes. This word list is around 90 gigabytes. So significantly larger. And so we use this in combination with what are called rule sets. So they'll take this and kind of jumble, like if it's password 1, it might add an exclamation for you, or change it to leet speak with password, and just do different mutations of the word that you're already seeing in those rule sets. So you can do a -R, and then there's ones like one rule to rule them all that's out there. And so I'll use that depending on the hash that we capture. So some hashes crack faster than others. So you may have the ability to run Rocku 2021 with the rule set, and it depends on your cracking rig as well. My cracking rig has 2 4090s in it. Most people don't have that luxury, so I have a lot more speed than the average person. So it just depends. But I'll go through that. I'll crack passwords. I may use Rocku 2020 or Rocku with a one rule word list. I may use crash found passwords with more complicated word lists or more complicated rule sets. And so that way we have mutations. So it's just playing around and mutating and doing some guessing. If they're in a certain area, I may use sports teams related to them, company names, things like that. So it's a variety of things, but we look for quick wins first and then start building upon those as we go.
And what's the success rate? Do you have like an average, like do you often get the passwords, or is it more difficult?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty, if we compromise, usually what happens is we compromise domain. And so when you compromise domain, there's this file called ntds.dit. You can dump that out, and that will give you the NTDS is what it's called. So it'll give you all the hashes for every user in your Active Directory environment. Our success rate usually hovers on those passwords anywhere from 25 to 50%, if not more, of cracking the passwords. Yeah. So the longest password we've cracked to date, I think now is 26 characters.
Oh, wow.
So yeah. So it kind of goes back to that. Yes, you do want special characters. You do want a good password. You want the longer, the better. But when they say that computationally, it means, hey, jumbled passwords. So like using a password manager, using something like privilege access management, CyberArk, things like that could be good. If we can, you just want to make something memorable, make it a sentence, make it something that is memorable to you, misspell the dictionary word if you're going to use a dictionary word. Just little things like that will trip an attacker up as well, because we're just looking for quick, easy wins.
And if you can speak another language, use that language, perhaps.
Absolutely. Yep. Spaces too. If you can add a space into your password, helps a lot. Okay, so I like to cover defenses as well, just to make sure if you're a sysadmin watching this, here you go. Pause right here. Take a screenshot. I'm going to cover some of the policies as well. But the best thing that you can do, one of the easiest things you can do to help protect your network and just like move your needle so much further in defense is just disable LMNR and MBTNS. Personally, I haven't seen any issues come from this in an environment. This is pretty safe to do. So if you can, here are the solutions for it on the screen. If you can't disable it, network access control, don't just allow somebody to come plug into your network. That would be bad. And then use stronger passwords, 14 characters or more. You should be making them longer, more complex, those sorts of things, and just making your environment overall safer. Just quickly, I will tab through what it looks like. We're going to make a GPO here. So we'll have group policy, come in here, apply that to the organization. And then we'll come through and we'll turn off multicast name resolution. So here's what that looks like just in a picture format for those visual people, but we're just going to make sure that that setting is enabled here for turn off multicast name resolution. And then we can also check that via PowerShell. So we've got this command down here to say, hey, is it enabled? If we're seeing a 0, that means we do not have it enabled. So that means, hey, your policy is applied correctly. Come through as well. For MBTNS, there's a couple options. This one I don't like because you actually have to go local to every machine and push out a policy. Not great, right? So for us, we prefer to just run a script like this. Again, PowerShell. You can put this into a logon script, and then you can push that script out in group policy as well through the startup properties and scripts. Run that, and that should push to everybody in your environment. You can come check this to see, hey, what's the setting? 2, in this instance, is a setting to say that, yes, it has been disabled. And that actually comes back to this here, where it says, hey, what's the default for MBTNS? Default is 0, enable is 1, disable is 2. So you just want to make sure that you see a 2 when you run this command here, and that will get you your mitigation.
Heath, again, just to leverage your real-world experience, because your team and yourself do pen tests all the time, right?
Yes.
Again, this is really common out there, and people haven't got it disabled. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say that if you've not been through a pen test before, especially, even companies that have been through a pen test just sometimes don't mitigate this.
Yeah.
And so we see this on at least 50% of the environments we're testing nowadays. And it used to be more prominent. It's kind of phasing out as more companies gear and move towards pen testing, but it's still very prominent. And this is probably the first attack that I will run in an environment just because it's so easy. I can let responder run while I'm going and doing other things, and I'll just wait for hashes to come through. And it's been as simple as literally running this, capturing a domain admin hash in the morning, cracking the password because it's simple, and then compromising the domain within an hour of the assessment beginning. It's very, very real world and very applicable. All right, so number 2 on the list, and it's not number 2 because it is the number 2 most likely. We'll cover that in the next one. This is number 2 because it plays so well with number 1. Yeah. So number 1 allowed us to capture a hash, take it offline, and crack it. Now, this is actually going to allow us to capture a hash and then relay that hash and get access instead. And this plays in very well because what happens if we're against something like CyberArk or a privilege access management provider where they have these long jumbled passwords that we don't know, we'll never be able to crack? Doesn't matter. If the protocol of LLMNR is still available to us and we can take that hash and relay that, we do not need to know the password of the machine or the password of the user. All we need is that user to be an admin on the other machine we're relaying to. Again, that is, hey, we've got user for one machine relaying to a second machine. That second machine, they're an admin on. So if we get somebody that maybe is a domain admin in the network, has access everywhere, or just happens to have access to multiple machines, easy enough. The second part of this is we need something called SMB signing to be disabled or not enforced. That is also easy enough because Microsoft kindly doesn't enforce it on any Windows workstations. They do on servers. So you're likely not compromising a server or domain controller or anything like that. But this is a great way to get your first initial foothold in a network and get some sort of access. And we'll take a look at what that looks like. Here is an example. This time we can use something like Nmap to actually identify machines that are running that have SMB signing disabled. And so, or it'll say enabled but not required. Same thing in
Yeah.
my opinion. And so we can do that. There's other tools that we can use for that as well, but Nmap's great. And then once we do that, we can go into Responder. We have to change some configuration settings in the tool. So we're going to turn off SMB and HTTP because instead of actually capturing those hashes, we're just going to pass them along. So that's all we're telling Responder to do here. Then we'll run Responder, same as before, but here you can see that SMB is actually listed as off and HTTP is off. So I always like to check I call it the Christmas tree, but I like to check the tree for colors and just see, because we run Responder so much, make sure that the settings are correct when we run it every time. From here, we're going to run this tool called NTLM Relay X. This is our relay tool. So once the hashes get passed to us, we then relay those hashes to different machines that are in our targets file. So we will identify machines that don't have SMB signing enabled. We'll drop them into a targets file right here, and then we will sit there and just wait for events to happen. Same example, an event occurs here. When that event occurs, we have this relay that happens. And so this relay happens, and you can see it's just a double duplicate here, but you can see that hashes get dumped from that machine. So these are the local SAM hashes. So now we have an administrator hash here. We can have user hashes depending on who's on the machine. We'll talk about that as we kind of see it, but you can see up here too that, hey, yes, we had Marvel F. Castle, who happens to be an administrator on both machines, succeeded. And we'll talk about that as we go too. But that's one example. We can also use interactive mode. So we add a tag I to our syntax, and that gives us a shell that we can then go interact with. And so we can connect to that shell. We can go in here. We can look at file shares, look at the file system, change passwords. There's a lot of stuff we can do. We'll take a look at that too. We also have command and control, or at least command injection, I should say. So we could say like, who am I? And you can see that it comes back as authority system when we run that command. So there's a lot of different things that we can do. A lot easier shown than just done with the PowerPoints. Let's jump back into the labs and take a look at this.
So Heath, I'm a boomer, as a lot of people say, I'm always a bit slow. You need two computers. Did I understand that right?
You did understand that right. Yep. So we've got this Punisher machine here. This is our Frank Castle user by default. I'm going to turn this Spider-Man machine on. This is going to be our Peter Parker user here that lives here. But Frank Castle on this user, Frank Castle, is a local admin here, but also happens to be a local admin here on Spider-Man as well. And so these are the two machines that we'll need to interact. And so we'll take a look at it really quick. While this is apparently doing updates, we're going to take a look at Nmap really quick and just look at what it looks like for finding this target. So let's say that we're on an assessment and we want to identify which hosts are out there that have SMB disabled. We can come in here and type in, if I can type, Nmap, and we'll do our script. And I'll just kind of tab over since I already have this. And then I just need to go pull, I believe it's 192, 168, 138. Call it 136, maybe. See if that works. Yeah, it did work. Okay, so this is one of the machines. We'll put both in. So we've got 138, 136. I did a PN just to make sure that it's online because I know it's online, but this is just saying, hey, if we're blocking ping probes, which ICMP traffic is often blocked nowadays, it's just saying, I know this machine's there, so go ahead and please check it. And you can see that SMB signing is enabled and required. If we check on 137, you can see that is enabled, not required. So those are our two hosts, and I believe 138 is our, and let's see, maybe I screwed it up. Oh, enabled and required. So sorry, 136 is our domain controller. So message signing and enabled and required. So we cannot relay to this machine. Okay. So that's a good example there. We have 137 enabled but not required. So that's fine. And 138 right here is enabled but not required. So we would just come in and we would make a targets file. So call it targets.txt. And so we've got 138 in there. I'm going to add 137 because this is what I do on a real engagement. And so any address that is possible to be in here, I'm going to add in here. But we cannot relay to ourselves. So keep that in mind. You cannot. But basically what's happening is we are taking this hash and passing it across and relaying that and authenticating. Because SMB signing is not enabled, it's just saying, yeah, you are who you say you are. If SMB signing is enabled, then we can't actually relay that hash. And we'll talk about defenses here in a second. But Let's go ahead and save this. So the other thing that we need to do is we need to edit responder. So we're going to just do a quick mouse pad and edit this configuration file here. And so what that's going to do is that's going to allow us to do this relay. So we want SMB as off, and we want HTTP as off. Okay, save that. Now we can come run responder. So sudo responder, similar to before, same syntax, everything else. And we're going to look at our tree. You're going to see that we have HTTP as off, SMB as off. That is correct. Okay, so the second part of this is making sure that we're running against that targets file. So that is going to be a NTLM, maybe sudo, NTLM relay X. Okay, so our targets file, we identified those IPs, SMB2 support, just so we can attack SMB2 as well. All right. Okay, so now all we do in a real world situation, we just sit here and wait. That's it. Like this will just wait. We'll wait for events to happen. Anytime a hash is collected, you won't actually see it collected here. You will just see something flow through here. And so we're going to push that along again, just like we did before. So I'm going to go ahead and log back in. We're going to make that event happen. So I'm going to push to our machine from the Punisher.
Okay.
This is going to take the hash that just comes through. It's going to push that over to Spider-Man and try to authenticate. If we are a local admin with this user, which we are, we should authenticate. So it says it's not accessible, but if you look over here, you can see that it tried to relay to 137, which is its own machine, so it did fail. Then it tried to relay to 138, which is this Spider-Man machine, and it did succeed. When it succeeded, we captured hashes. We've got an administrator hash, and we've got this Peter Parker hash that lives on this machine too. So I'm going to do, I like to copy these and just immediately, and we'll see this later on, we look at past the hash. I like to come in here and I like to look at the hashes. So here, we don't need these default accounts. None of those are important to us. We want any known users, and then of course our administrator account hash. And so we could take a look at these. If these hashes were identical, for example, we would know that they're the same password. Yeah. They're different passwords here, but that's okay. But we can take these hashes, we can try to crack them if we want, or we can use a pass the hash attack, which we'll talk about. But we never need to know what this hash actually equates to. This could be the best password ever. Now that we have the hash, we can do a lot of things with it. And we'll take a look at that. But that is an example of a relay. Let me show you another relay attack, but this time let's do an interactive. Just to kind of show you it does have a little bit more robustness to it. So I'm going to load up this interactive module. I'm just going to repeat this process here and get this to just kind of kick over. Okay. Hopefully we get an interactive shell over here, and we do. So it succeeded, and it gives us this shell. It says, hey, we've got an interactive SMB client shell over on TCP, and then it's 127, so it's our local host with 11,000 port. So I'm going to use a tool called Netcat. And Netcat's going to allow me, we can use this to bind or listen, which we haven't talked about shell types or anything, but we can say, hey, I want to listen on port 7777, which is this. And that would allow for a connection to connect to me. So more of a reverse shell type attack. Here, we're just going to actually bind to this. So we're going to say, I want to connect to 127001 at port 11,000. And so I'm going to hit enter here. And then I can come type help, and you can see all the things that we could do in here, which is quite a bit.
Wow. Yeah.
Yep. So we can come in here. Most importantly, like we can look at shares. We can use shares. We can change the password of the user, which is nice. I mean, I wouldn't do that on an assessment, but you could add directories, add files, or make directories, add files, mount this. There's a lot of different things that we can do. For example, we can look at the shares. We can use C and then just ls. And we have access to the file system. Nice. So if we wanted to come dump out files or dig around, we totally could. Me personally, and you'll see why, but me personally, I like this. Like, give me the hashes. I don't spend a lot of time. Like, a lot of the hacker mentality is dropping shell onto machines and getting access. And I'm going to show you how to do that, but I don't spend a lot of time doing that. More importantly, I spend time with hashes, I spend time with passwords, and I spend time bouncing around to see what else I can get access to. And so let's go ahead and exit out of this. Let's take a look at a couple things that we can do. So for example, we do know that we have access now to this Spider-Man machine. And so we could do something if we wanted to drop shell. we could do a PS exec, and we could do something like Marvel, something like this, Marvel fcastle, and we can even put a password in here. Password 1, since we know it. And this should drop shell, hopefully, maybe not, actually, because we're blocking with antivirus, which is okay. This is a new-ish feature of Defender, which is good. There's still ways around this. I'm going to log in and just kind of turn that off really quick just to show concept. But there are ways around this too. And so while we wait for that, let's talk about how we can defend or get around some of this. So there are a couple other tools, including PSExec. PSExec is what is called a sysinternals tool. It was built actually to be an admin tool, and it's still in use. And so what this is doing is basically connecting, uploading some form of malware, and then allowing us to get a shell. There are 2 other tools. WMI exec is one of them. Same syntax, same everything. And the other one is SMB exec. So just depending on the protocols that are enabled, most of the time, one of these other tools will work if you are actually getting blocked by antivirus. And I would say antivirus only blocks us a handful of times still. It's cat and mouse with attacking. So there are tools that'll work one day, won't work the next. And then you have to figure out, okay, how do I get around this, and what do I do now? So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the protection just to kind of show you. Again, this is another reason, though, why I don't drop shell. Like, if we're trying to avoid detection, there's no need to do this. So here is an example of, though, a tool that will drop shell. And now, who am I? Host name, all that fun stuff. We're on the machine. Yeah. So antivirus did its job there. Another thing we can do is we can do a secret stump. So let me delete this, actually. I'm just going to steal from the syntax, though, since it's similar enough. So if we do password 1 here with our fcastle, so let's say we know the user exists across multiple machines. Local admin of any machine, though, we can run that secret stump, and we can dump out any of the secrets that are in here. And so this tool, again, gives us those hashes that we already saw and we got from our attack here. And also, we do get some extra stuff. Like, we get this, what's called a DCC, or domain cache credential. So anybody from the domain that's logged in here does leave this hash behind. We could take this hash and try to crack it. It could be stale. It just depends on when they logged in. It could be old, but it still gives us an inclination, if we can crack that password of maybe administrator here, hey, we may be able to get the domain admin account because they logged into this machine. We've got some other things in here. LSA, not so important on this, at least. The rest of these are okay. Sometimes you see clear text passwords from services. Sometimes you see on older machines, like Windows 7 or older, Windows 8 actually, Server 2012 and older. Those machines have what's called wdigest enabled by default. Wdigest allows for clear text credentials to be shown. So if you log in at any point from login to reboot, your password is stored in clear text on one of those older operating systems. And there is something, you can still turn that on in later versions, but you have to flip that switch. You have to have access to the machine as an attacker, flip the switch. They have to then reboot. And then if they log in, then that's kind of a watering hole attack as you wait. So it's more patient attack. We usually don't do that during a pen test, but it is an option. But what's kind of cool is, and this is kind of jumping ahead just a little bit, but let's do a history grep. Okay. So we can do something like this, where this is kind of a pass the hash, sort of. So we can use a hash of an administrator, and I screwed this up just a little bit, but we need the syntax here. Secret stump pi. We don't need this here. So we could say administrator at, and let's say, for example, we did do that SMB relay attack. We just grabbed the hash. We can take that hash that we captured, and I think it may be different. It is. So we could take this, and then without ever knowing the passwords to that machine, we could still dump out these secrets of that machine. And so we can get access to more than just the local SAM hashes that we had. And it's possible, too, that this hash works in other places, which we'll take a look at later. But this is an example of same thing. We use an account without knowing the password. It's just local admin, and we're able to dump out the secrets of that device. Very, very nice, very cool trick.
I'm glad you highlighted that, because I think some people misunderstand that a hash, you don't need the password if you got the hash right.
Yes, yeah, depending on the hash. Like, these NTLM hashes, completely reusable. So I don't ever have to crack this password to know what it is. And that's it's an amazing little feature of Windows.
I love the feature. Yeah. When you went to your Windows computer, you were actually initiating something. In the real world, do you like wait? Is there a certain time of the day that's better, to run this stuff, or do you just let it run the whole time that you're doing the pen test?
Great question. So morning and right after lunch is best time to run these things. That's when their most action is taking place. So you also have to understand. So our role as a pen tester is to actually be noisy. So there's
Okay.
differences between true pen testing and red teaming. Red teaming is like stealthy. We're trying to find a
Yeah.
sneaky way to break in, not be detected. Pen testing, we're baselining. So what we do first thing in the morning before I even run Responder, for example, I'm going to run Nessus or a vulnerability scanner. That's going to make a lot of noise. That does help me as an attacker sometimes too, because some of that noise ends up coming back to the responder tool and I'm able to capture hashes or do something like this. And so first thing in the morning, generate a lot of traffic. Also, traffic is being generated on the network from other users. And then same thing right after lunch. This is more prevalent with IPv6 attacks, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But
Great.
Responder, we're always listening for network traffic. So anytime that it happens, it happens. But it's something that you can run all day and it's perfectly safe to run the whole time. So just depending on what attacks you're doing with it. But yeah, time of day is very important for attacks.
And you said you don't necessarily need a shell because popping a shell is like everyone on YouTube's favorite thing to do, but it's not
Yeah.
necessary in the real world when you're doing a pen test, right?
No, there's plenty of times where I've got examples of pen tests I've been on where I've never popped shell. Most of the time, I never popped shell, and then there's been times where I've never even compromised a domain account. And we'll see that here in a little bit. But for example, what you're seeing now, let's say that we had an SMB relay attack of where the password was not crackable, but we
Okay.
did relay that attack or we relayed that user local admin on some machine. We're able to then dump out this admin hash and this admin hash is being used everywhere because this hash is the like maybe the password that they're using for this is the password the help desk team sets up every single computer with.
Yeah.
If you're doing that, you have the same local admin password. I now not only own this computer, I own every single computer in the network that uses that password. And so all I have to do is go around and look for secrets, maybe clear text passwords that are in here, maybe domain cache credentials. Maybe this password happens to work on the domain controller. Doesn't matter. I have compromised environments where it's only the local users that we're attacking and until we get to the domain controller. So it's not always about popping shell. It's not always about getting that domain user. We want to do things like that and it feels good, but we don't have
Yeah.
to do things like that to still compromise. And there are local vulnerabilities just like there are domain level vulnerabilities as well.
I'm glad you showed the antivirus blocking you because, like you just said there, you know, don't do something unless you really need to do it. So, like you've explained, no need to pop the shell because it might be blocked anyway, and notifications may be triggered, I suppose.
Absolutely. And we do intentionally try to get caught. Like again,
Okay.
pen testing is being loud and it's trying to baseline things, but we don't do it right away. We will start very loud. Like we are hoping you're catching a vulnerability scanning. We're hoping you're catching some of the noisy things that we're doing. As the team is communicating with the client and they say, "Hey, we see you." Okay, we'll get a little bit quieter. But there are instances where we don't get caught the entire time, and then we will intentionally run like very very simple to catch malware just to see if we're going to get caught because that helps us tell the baseline to the client too and say here's where you saw us, here's where you didn't, and here's where you can improve. And so we are trying to get caught at the end of the day. We want like as much as we want to compromise the domain and we want
Yeah.
to get everywhere at the same time we equally as want to our clients to be able to block us, catch us, not compromise domain, all that stuff because that means they have better security in place. And so overall at the end of the day that's our job is to get them to as the best of security as that we can.
I think I heard you tell a story where I can't remember the exact name. There was a client who had some software, but they just installed it with defaults and they didn't actually set it up, and you guys were able to do almost anything.
Yeah, yeah. It just led to like a chain of events. It was just a very default software, but inside that software, they were trialing it. There was a password in there, and that password ended up we tested it and passed the password attack. We were able to get access to one machine. We were able to dump credentials like you're seeing now. There was a clear text credential of a domain admin on that machine, and we were able to just run with it. So like little things like that, little tiny chain of event attacks happen all the time and lead us to bigger events. So honestly, why you should have a pen test is because these things can get found out and help with security as well.
You're blindsided by yourself, right? I mean, I think that's the problem. You you can't see your own mistakes. You need someone like you to come in and show those mistakes.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of times too where there's just people, even if you are good with security, sometimes IT shops are running 1, 2, 3 people when they should be running 10, 15, 20 people. And so a lot of overworked people that do not have enough time to focus on security, they're drowning in other work. And so, yeah, it does help to have a second set of eyes or just an outside set of eyes to come in there and evaluate the environment.
Is there still a lot of job opportunities for people who want to become pen testers?
There are. It is a hard field to get into. And so blue team defenders outweigh us 10 to 1. And so it's a very specialized field. There are more opportunities in the blue side, but if you are dedicated, you put in the work, you learn, there's always room for new pen testers here. The problem is, and I'm going to be as transparent as possible, is a lot of people think hacking is cool. It's sexy. You see it in the movie. Nobody talks about defenders in the movies. They talk about that,
of course.
the attackers. So
of course.
It's a cool job. It really is, but it is a lot of work. There's a lot of studying involved in it. It does require constant studying. Like, it's not one of those things that you can just check the box. You know what you're doing now. You're good. No, it changes so fast. So you have to be up to date on everything. And so I think a lot of people get into it and realize, wow, this is a lot of work and maybe it's not for me. And so it is, it's not, I don't want to call it an elite field. It's just an advanced field, and it's something that is hard to break into. But once you're in, you're in. And so if you're willing to put in that work and you do the study time, you do the effort, you can definitely make it. Anybody can do this. Okay, so quickly on to defenses here. So the main defense here is enabling SMB signing on all devices. This does completely stop the attack. The big con here is it can have some issues with file copies. So it slows file copies down anywhere around 15 to 20%.
Okay.
If you're an organization that's doing a lot of file copies, that's like your main thing, this could be something that maybe you don't want to enable. For most day-to-day organizations, turning this on, absolutely fine. I would recommend test bedding this first, making sure that you do a select few, maybe 10, 15, 20 devices, see how it operates, and then do more of a widespread implementation. But that is the number one answer. For the rest of it, we could disable what's called NTLM authentication and use Kerberos. Kerberos authentication is how we authenticate on Active Directory. So we could turn off NTLM, but if NTLM or Kerberos stops working, Windows will just go right back to NTLM anyway. So it's not a perfectly safe solution. We could do account tiering and should do account tiering, meaning that if there's Bob and Bob's a domain admin, Bob should have an account that's like Bob-DA. That Bob just uses to log into only the domain admin or domain controller or domain admin needed things. Domain admin should not be logging into regular workstations or things where they're not needed. Should have separate accounts there and tiered accounts for that. Another thing is local admin restriction. If you don't give your users local admin to every machine or even their own machines, this helps significantly prevent a lot of attacks. This does increase help desk tickets. Hey, I need something installed, whatever the user might need, you're going to have to do for them. And that could add in work to your help desk, but overall it's still a best practice. Again, for mitigation, these are the ones that we're going to want to mitigate. So we've got our digital signing communications for client and for server. We're going to make sure those are enabled in our policies. And then we can always check that with a reg query to make sure that the 0x1 means that we are enabled for both the signatures there. So that would be your quick spot check on that.
In the real world, do you find that, I'm assuming laziness triumphs or ease of use triumphs security in a lot of cases?
Yeah, and people default to being lazy. Even as a security practitioner, I do it. I've got weak passwords that I use for things that I don't care about. As long as it's something, you just have to assess your own security, both internally, like your personal security and your work security. For example, if I've got something sensitive, I'm going to use a password manager and have it behind a password that I wouldn't be able to tell you even if you wanted to know. But if it's like a basic account that I'm setting up online and I don't care if it gets compromised, I'll probably just use a weak password that I can remember very easily. And I'm okay with that risk assessment. Some people will be like, you're crazy. You got to use a password manager for everything. So you just have to choose where to be lazy. And I think a lot of times, especially without proper education, which I think a lot of companies fail to do proper security training, that is where it gets bad. Because if the end user could know, like, hey, this weak password is going to cause you problems, and what that could lead to for you or for the organization or anything else, that is where it gets dangerous. And that education is very important.
So Heath, I got to ask you the question, right? Favorite password manager? I'm assuming it's not LastPass.
I like Bitwarden from a personal
Yep.
standpoint. From an enterprise standpoint, we like Keeper. Try different ones out, see what you like.
Yeah.
The reason I like Bitwarden from a personal standpoint is because it's completely open source.
Yeah.
So they do have paid options, but you completely use it for free, and it's open source. So if there's vulnerabilities, unlike LastPass, which gets hacked, it seems like frequently,
Yeah.
Bitwarden doesn't have a lot of reputation on that side because anybody can go view the source code and what they're doing. So I really like that about Bitwarden.
So yeah, sorry for taking you on these tangents. It's just nice once again to get your real world experience, right? So appreciate it. And I mean,
Yeah,
this is
absolutely.
really exciting. What the part that everyone likes, getting shell access, right?
Yeah, we actually just covered it. So there's other ways to do it, and we'll just kind of click through. We won't have to do a hands-on demo because we kind of just did, but we could use Metasploit. Metasploit is
Yeah.
something that it gets caught. So this is kind of like my I want to get caught tool.
Okay.
We can use PSExec, for example, like we see PSExec here, similar to the tool we just used and got caught with. This one is almost guaranteed to get you caught by any antivirus. So it's something that you can use. It's good to practice with Metasploit, but real world, using exploitation with Metasploit is not that high up there on my list. Again, popping shells not that high up there. It is good for certain attacks or certain post-compromise attacks or even enumeration. I'm not saying Metasploit's not a good tool. It's a fantastic tool. It's just some of it is very easily detectable. So you could
Yeah.
use this for shell access. And I've got some options in here. You could also pass the hash like we saw before, and same kind of thing, or use a hash instead of a password to get access. Either way, same thing here. We just saw this, but PSExec using password 1 to get access to a machine. Same concept, and here with hashes as well. So this is the same syntax on how we're getting access here. Again, with PSExec, it is detectable nowadays. Defender's picking it up. Not every antivirus is picking it up still. WMI exec, SMB exec, great tools to use as well. Okay, and we covered lab on that. So we're at the one you wanted to see, David, which is
Yeah,
our
definitely.
IPv6.
So I got to, before we even start this, IPv6 in the real world, is it common? Do people use it?
Way more common than anything else. This is almost like a cheat code. This
Okay.
one is so dangerous. And the thing is because so this attack works on abusing IPv6 because it's just kind of sitting there in the background.
Yeah.
We mostly focus on IPv4 in networks, but IPv6 is enabled. And so it's out there looking for DNS, it's looking for resolution, and it wants to be seen. And all we're doing is letting it be seen. So we become a man in the middle, attacker in the middle type position with a rogue IPv6 DNS server. And then we control communication. We do relay attacks based off of that. And it's very, very dangerous. So I will show you the differences here. So we can run this tool called NTLM Relay X, and we're going to run that in combination with a tool called Man in the Middle 6. But basically, we're pointing to our LDAP server, which is our domain controller at 136. We're going to give it this fake WPAD. You don't have to worry too much about that. And then we're going to use this -L, which is a loot folder. So we can create something called loot me, is what I call it. But you can call it whatever you want. It's just going to create a folder for you. And we just wait with this man in the middle 6 tool on our domain here of marvel.local, and we wait for something to happen.
Okay.
And so what we're waiting for is we're just waiting for these addresses. Like you see, they get assigned here. And so we're becoming the IPv6 DNS. And then we wait for these events. Now, an event is as simple as a computer rebooting. It's as simple as somebody logging into the network. And it's very, very dangerous. So if we take a look, for example, this is a non-admin event. So like this is just a computer rebooting. The computer authenticates. Computers have passwords and they can authenticate to Active Directory or to your domain controller. And
Yep.
so here it's getting information, even though we don't do anything else. Because it is authenticated, it creates what's called a ticket granting ticket or a TGT. It uses that to then query the domain, and we're dumping out information in the domain. And so that gives us like all these different files in our loot me
Wow.
folder. So we get like domain computers that are here, domain computers by operating system. If we want to find like the maybe older operating systems running in the network that we want to target, who our domain users are, what are our users by group, who are our domain admins, who are our sensitive users that we want to attack. A lot of different things that we can find in here. And here's an example of like that domain users by group. So here's administrators that we can see, and who are domain administrators in here, or just administrators. And you can see like passwords and descriptions. This is common
Oh,
as
wow.
well
Is it? Wow.
because because people or admins will go in there and they will just put in a password for like a service account or something and say, hey, I'm just going to dump this in here. Nobody can see this. And in fact, anybody that is authenticated to the network can actually query descriptions and see them. So if you're putting passwords in descriptions, take them out because anybody can see that. But you can also see things like last login time and when was the password changed. Like this, for example, if I'm an attacker and I see that this account has never been logged into, like these two right here, that's suspicious to me because that could be a honeypot. Like, why do you have an account here that is running that has never been logged into, that has a password, especially in a description? Why are you making this so easy? And so I may not attack that account just because that could just be a honeypot waiting to trigger if that account becomes compromised. So there are things like that to look out for as well. But we get to see who are our domain administrators, password descriptions, computers, all that fun stuff, policies, groups. And so very useful. But even better, let's say an administrator logs into the network anywhere, just logs into the network. That will then create a user for us. So you can see a user and a password gets created, and it gives that user permissions of this replication get changes all. So which creates the ability to do what's called a DC sync attack with this tool we've already used, secretsdump.py. So then we can go in and dump out all of the NTDS that we talked about earlier from the domain controller, get everybody's password hash, and that happens in seconds. We don't need any passwords, anything else, just sitting man in the middle, attacker in the middle position, and we can go in here, dump out the credentials for everybody, and that's what we'll get. Let's do that in a lab. I'm going to get everything kicked back on. Some of my computer may have fallen asleep, so let's make sure.
It's funny, right? Because we've been saying for how many years that IPv6 is going to replace IPv4? And I'm assuming your advice is don't use IPv6 or turn it off or something?
Well, there's things, again, this comes down to settings, right? There's things like channel binding is one, LDAP channel binding is one. It's kind of like the SMB signing. You want to have signing in channel binding enabled so that way they can't be relayed. There's like the protected users group in Active Directory. You want your administrative users to be in there. You want it to be where your users can't be delegated, things like that. Like all will help with this attack. Turning off IPv6 in a network will probably cause issues. So there are some rule sets, and we'll talk about it here in a second, but there are certain inbound and outbound rules that you can configure to disable specifically this attack from happening, which is nice. So I mean, it's fine to use IPv6, but you just have to be protected against it in other ways as well. So
I mean, I'm obviously throwing you like questions that people would say, right? And obviously not always the best questions, but in the real world, do you find in like large organizations that are actually using IPv6 like properly? Or is this, like you said, like a cheat code to get in because they're not doing it right?
Hardly ever. Wow. And it's usually ones that have been through a pen test before that are like, oh, I need to fix that. This is, again, just one of those things on one of those features, right, of Windows. So, okay, so I'm going to run two tools. So man in the middle 6 is one. I'm not going to run that quite yet. So big thing with this is becoming a DNS server. This can cause issues. Do not run this for more than 5 to 10 minutes at a time in a network.
Okay.
This can take down a network. So you got to be very careful. Don't just like let this run and just walk away. So you got to be, time of day here is most important than any other attack. You want to sit here like first thing in the morning when people are logging in. This is that time. And then you also have time of day like right after lunch when this could be good to run. And then intermediate sprints in between, but you just don't want to make sure, you want to make sure you're not causing issues for end users or taking down the network or anything like that. So very, very important. Okay, so NTLM relay X on this one. Let's see, sudo. Okay, and then we're going to do a -6. All right, same concept. We'll have that loop me folder if we want it. Let me actually go and let me remove that loop me folder. Just for the heck of it. All right. So I'm going to run this, and this up and running doesn't do anything, doesn't matter. What's important is this tool up and running. Once you start running this is your 5 to 10 minute window. All right. So let's say here, it's going to already automatically start getting IPv6 addresses and assigning those out here. And so what we're going to do to kind of speed this along is I'm going to just reboot this machine. So, and demo gods be with us. But this reboot of the machine is going to kind of trigger that first event happening. And all we're waiting for is that to happen. So IPv6 leases happen every, I think they're 30 minutes by default. Don't quote me. I think it's 30. And so what's happening here is we're breaking that lease and renewing that lease with our man in the middle 6 over here. And so once that comes up, because I see Wonderland. Yeah, I don't see Punisher N here. So Punisher should connect here. Once Punisher connects, we're going to see this tab start going crazy if the reboot ever happens. So we might have to do some magical speeding here. There we go. We're in. It just takes a second. So booted online, connected, and then now we're establishing that connection from the computer. So we haven't logged in. Nothing's happened yet. But the Punisher $, we see a $sign after the end. It's usually a computer. So we've relayed. We've got that loot directory that's come into play now. So if we go into our folders, should have a new loot me folder right here. And so here's all that stuff that just got dumped out. So like domain users by group was one of the examples we saw. So if we look at that, here's that password and description. You can scroll through this, see who your domain admins are, enterprise admins, all that fun stuff. What domain users exist, all that good stuff here.
Literally just from a reboot, right?
Just from a reboot, nothing else. And this gives you so much information. Even though we're not a user or anything, we have information now on who to attack maybe, or even if we want to do like a password guessing attack, like a spray is what we call it, we now know every single user that exists. So we can build out like winter 2024 exclamation and try it against every single user in the environment. And chances are it probably works somewhere. And so that's incredibly valuable for us.
Success rate in the real world?
Fairly high.
Great.
It's a timing thing. So sometimes it comes down to just getting sometimes we'll see success happening with users, but we just don't get that domain administrator to actually connect, but we'll still report on it. And so it comes down to timing for attackers. Real attackers, they have unlimited time. Us, we have usually a week or so to do an engagement. So here goes the other side of this. So marvel.local, we're going to log in as the administrator, if I could type right. Okay, and if things go well, there we go. Okay, so it comes flying through. It takes a minute to find it because it does do a bunch of entries. So what happens now that we logged in with the administrative user, you can see this user has been created here. And I'm just going to go ahead and put this in here. And it gives us a nice jumbled password. Here it is. That password exists. Okay. So now we've got created this user and this password. I'm actually going to log into the domain controller because we haven't yet. I just want to show this proof of concept and how this looks like. So from our perspective, and why this is even more dangerous, is as an administrator, this doesn't look all that malicious. Now, it looks weird. Don't get me wrong. If you've got a lot of users, though, and you're not detecting on new user creation or something like that, you have the ability to just completely miss this. So like a lot of detection in Active Directory especially is like, oh, I'm looking for a new domain admin that's been created. Well, what's happening here is this user, either one, I'm not sure which one it is, but either one, they're just put in the domain users group. You don't see them as domain admin. Like if I look at domain admin, for example, you can see domain admin, enterprise admin, all this stuff. This user has the same permissions, at least to dump out the domain controller via DC sync attack. So we can prove that concept. It doesn't look malicious. Nothing looks wrong or amiss here. But if we go and we do a secrets dump, let's kill this. I'm going to kill this too. Just good practice. Okay, so if we do a secrets dump, and I'm going to delete out this password. And then we're just going to paste this user that we got in here. Okay, so all we're doing is saying, hey, secrets dump this user at this location, which this is our domain controller. And we're going to dump out just DC NTLM. That means we're not dumping out the full secrets. We're just dumping out this NTDS. So I'm going to hit enter on that. And it's going to prompt me for a password. And because this password's so jumbled and messed up, it could cause issues with Linux. So I just do it this way to paste. Okay. And you have just successfully compromised the domain controller. So here's your administrator hash for that local. And then you've got, for example, T-Stark is domain admin. These are all password hashes that we can now take and try to crack offline. And we can do that a lot faster. This is NTLM hash. NTLM hash is very, very fast to try to crack. NTLM v2, very slow comparatively. So now we can take every single user that exists on this domain and try to crack their passwords. This is all of them. And so if you've got weak passwords, the sky's the limit on what we crack and who we crack. If it's an admin, another important user is this KRB TGT. You may hear about what are called golden ticket attacks.
Yeah.
And you need this user here. This is your Kerberos ticket granting ticket user. This is the user that makes all the tickets for you to have access. So you basically, we've seen a meme online. I got a friend that talks about it a lot, but a good example of this is like taking an airline ticket, just a board, writing pilot on top of it, and then you become pilot. And so you control whatever you want to do in the domain once you have this account. So this is more important, in my opinion, than the administrator account. That is an IPv6 attack, and how easy it is. It's such a cheat code that I don't run it first. It feels dirty running it first.
Yeah.
Like I run responder first, and then I'll run this a little bit later on, maybe next day or later in the afternoon. But I don't run this first. It's too easy.
So because I'm slow as always, that weird username and password that was created automatically when you ran the script, right?
That's correct. We're just sitting there waiting, and that administrator logged into the network. That created a relay of that administrator's credentials to the domain controller. That was allowed for permissions to then create this random username and password and give it permissions to do this attack here that you see. So it all happened in a matter of seconds.
Administrator didn't think it was a bad account because it had low permissions, but you were still able to get all the hashes.
Looking at it, it just looks like a normal account. I mean, it's just a domain user. Now the name is weird. But most companies aren't detecting on user creation; they're detecting on domain admin or a user getting added to the domain admin group. And so that didn't happen here. It just adds it to these permission settings. It flips the flag for this account, and that's it. So it's incredible what this attack does and how fast it does it.
So it's interesting what you said, that it's companies who haven't had a pen test that fall into these traps, and hence why they obviously need to get pen tests.
Yes, 100%.
That's
or
gross.
At least like study this, learn this for yourself, and know what defenses to expect. But yes, pen tests are very important. And they're becoming compliance nowadays, where it's becoming regulated more and more. So I think the option of having a pen test may be something of the past as we move into the future.
I mean, it's important. And I mean, it's also important to get the right people to do it. And I mean, that's why it's great to have you sharing this, because people who on the blue team side can see what you guys can do and then reach out to you to come and do the pen test.
Yeah, and not all pen test companies are created equal. A lot of companies are selling pen tests and they're just a vulnerability scan, and it is dangerous, right? And so if you highest amount of money spent does not equal highest quality, but lowest amount of money spent does not equal high quality either. So you just got to be careful with where you're going. Vet your pen test companies, get recommendation letters, talk to people in industry. It's very important. Okay, so mitigation, again, wall of text. I don't expect you to memorize this. You can pause, take a screenshot, all that fun stuff. Basically, we do not want to disable IPv6 completely. We do have these core rules that we can put in for inbound, outbound that'll help protect this attack from happening. Again, we've got other things like this LDAP-S, so making sure that we have LDAP signing on, LDAP channel binding. It's very similar to SMB signing, where you want to verify whatever's getting relayed is that person getting relayed. We talked about the protected users group, very important as well, making sure that users cannot be delegated, thus cannot be impersonated, which is kind of what we're doing here, impersonating users. Making sure WPAD's disabled as well, because this is used in a lot of attacks. All these are really just best practices, but they do chain into this attack as well. So I've got pictures really quick, mitigating IPv6. This just comes down to, again, rule sets in Defender firewall here. So making sure that you have those flags flipped correctly. Here's another flag. I'm going to speed through it, but feel free to pause, take pictures if you need to. Same thing here, requiring your LDAP client signing requirements, requiring your server signing requirements, channel binding, and then also making sure that we're put into this account as sensitive and cannot be delegated inside of the account feature in Active Directory is very important. And then putting your users in that protected users group is also very important. Okay, so we are now moving on. So the attacks that we saw initially are what are called initial attacks. And so those are attacks that we drop a laptop in the network. So you can assume compromise in any way that you want. So, hey, somebody phished a user, got into the network, or somebody snuck in on site, dropped a laptop off. In reality, as a pen tester, we're just shipping a device. That device has a VPN that phones home when it's plugged into a network. And then we also connect to that tunnel, that VPN, and then we are able to communicate to that endpoint, and then we attack network based off of that device.
Yeah.
So we have basically a device that has no authentication, no credentials, no anything. It's just a rogue laptop in an environment. We're figuring it out for ourselves. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to assume that we have some bit of information. We're not a domain admin by any means, but we have a user. And so with the user, we could do a lot of things. We now have what's called that ticket granting ticket, that TGT. And so because we have that, we can do different things. We can query the network. We can do enumeration. You saw a lot of that. We could also run some attacks, which you're going to see here in just a minute. But we're going to start with what we already have as well. We have a password and we have hashes. We can pass those around. And so what we're going to look at is pass the password, pass the hash. And so there are tools out there. There's a tool called CrackMapExec. It is now known as NetExec. I'm still going to show you the CrackMapExec version. There's been some sort of hostile takeover. I don't know what's going on over there, but the tool is kind of like in between owners right now. So I'm going to keep it to the one that is functioning and working well. And so CrackMapExec is a great tool. And basically what you can do is you sweep a subnet. So like, for example, I'm sweeping an SMB protocol. I'm sweeping this subnet here, and this is why knowing networking, insider notation, all that stuff is very important. Yeah. And then we've got username, or domain that we're using, and password. And then we're going to say, okay, where is this user that we've compromised? Maybe we just did a responder, LLMNR hash grab. Where are they a local admin? And we can sweep through the network. And anywhere they're a local admin, we can run secret stump on, so we can collect more information and so forth. So this is kind of where I was telling you, I don't really get shells. I find access and then use that access to get information and collect information until I can compromise. And it's all cyclical. Like all you're doing, the best attackers are focusing on enumeration, information gathering. How much detail can I collect? And how can I then use that information against you later? And that's all I'm trying to do. So I've got a bit of information here. I've got this password, and you can see I sweep the network. Yes, the Punisher machine, but also Spider-Man, which we knew through that relay attack. But if we didn't know that, hey, now we know. We can also use local hashes. We can get local hashes from Meterpreter or Metasploit as well, but we're not going to show that. And then also we can do it with Secret Stump, which we've shown. So we can grab those local hashes. You've seen us do a shell with a hash, but also we can do a pass the hash attack. So same concept here. We use SMB, we sweep a subnet, and then guess what? We use that hash that we do not know the password to with local auth here, and we can actually dump out information. So like, hey, this user is also used on the Punisher. So that's kind of that concept of where we're using that same local admin password over and over. And this is very, very real world. This happens all the time. There is something called lapse that will allow this to be prevented, but a lot of companies don't implement that, and they should. We'll talk about defenses in a minute, but a lot of companies, help desk uses the same password to set everything up. They ship that out to the employee, and every time you're using that same password, if somebody compromises that hash, doesn't matter about the password, that hash, then they can get access to all those machines that use the same hash or password. So very dangerous. We can do things like dump out the SAM. They have different features in here. So like we could do a tac SAM and dump out SAM hashes for all the machines that we have access to, quick and easy. We can dump out share information for all the machines we have access to. We can dump out the LSA. So we can look at what secrets are there, kind of like those DCC credentials that we were looking for before. Those are important. And then we can also run additional modules. So they've got a bunch of modules built in here. We can take a look at this as well. But in reality, there's a ton of things in here, like searching for key pass files, right? Those can be hacked. GPP, which we're not going to talk about. Different settings in here, impersonation, all kinds of fun things. There's this tool. It's getting blocked more and more. It's called LSASI. But what it does, too, is it looks at the LSAS, so what's in memory. And so let's say, for example, we've got a user that's logged in. We can also pull that hash down in memory. I've seen clear text passwords get pulled down in memory from this as well. So it just depends on what's running with the time that you run the module, what's stored in memory. But yeah, you can actually pull down credentials and hashes and other things of users and use that to attack them as well. One other cool thing about CrackMapExec is it has this thing called a CME DB, so the CrackMapExec database. And you can come in here and look at things like, hey, what hosts have I collected creds for? Or what creds do I have for what host and what passwords are used? So you can pass this around. Also, when I said earlier there were tools to find SMB signing, this will tell you what has SMB signing enabled, with a 1 or disabled with a 0. So it's a quick way to find out where you can sweep for SMB signing as well. And so using this database is pretty neat. All right, let's jump into a lab here.
Really like the way that you do a bit of theory and then jump straight into a lab. It's great.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. We're going to take crack map exec, and we're going to do SMB. And on this one, we're just going to pass it across the network. So 192.168.138.0/24. We're going to give it a user first of fcastle, a domain of marvel.local, and a password of password1. Let's just say we're going back to the LLMNR. I capture that password. This is one of the first things I'm going to do. I'm going to run secret dump against that machine that I captured it from, just to see if I can get credentials if they are a local admin. And then I'm going to sweep the network and just see, okay, where does this user have access to besides their own device? And so we can run that and hopefully it'll work. And everywhere we see pwned is a good place to know that we have access to that machine. So this would be one example. And then we can come through, just to give another example, we can do a crack map exec. I'm actually just going to do this. And then this time we can do a user of administrator. And let me check and see if this hash is the same. It is the same, so that's perfect. So I'm going to delete this. Don't have to worry about this stuff. But we're going to do this local auth against this hash here. So we did capture this hash from one machine. I'm going to see if that hash works anywhere else. And basically that's what I want to know, because I'm going to come in here. I've got this hash. I want to know if it goes anywhere else. I've got this hash.
Yeah.
I will try this hash with Peter Parker. I'll try this hash with administrator. Anywhere that I find a password or a hash, I'm going to try it and spray it, because you don't know what machines you're going to get access to. Yeah. So here now we've got access to the Punisher and Spider-Man again. So both machines use the same hash there. And it's just rinse and repeat. We could do that tac SAM here, and that'll dump out the SAM for any computer that we do have access to, which is nice. So we'll get that, and then just dumps out the SAM here, and that'll store that to the database that we talked about. So you can see there is a Peter Parker user and a Frank Castle user that are local. Both of them, you can see it, same password hash. So they're using the same password. And those are little things that we look for. And we'll look at a case study too. I think we'll kind of tie this all together when we're done. That's an example here. You can always do this TAC L. So if we go back, just delete all this. We'll list those modules out we talked about. And so like here are the different modules. Like we can pull wireless password and clear text. I know you've covered that. I've covered that. Yeah. This does it for you. So if you want to know the company's wireless password, maybe it's reused elsewhere. WDigest, we mentioned briefly. This will actually flip that switch on for you, which is nice. So there's different things in here that we can do. We're going to look at that LSASI really quick. So it's going to dump the LSAS and look for clear text creds. But a ton of different things that you can do in here beyond just that. So we're going to go back up one and do TAC M and do LSASI. So this may or may not pull anything because we haven't really logged into the Spider-Man machine yet. So let's see what it pulls down, and then we'll log in and we'll talk about something else. Oh, actually it did pull in. Okay, so Peter Parker is logged in. I know why this happened actually. So here's Peter Parker's hash, but here's our administrator password hash in clear text. And so what's happening, and here's another good example, is if we go back to Spider-Man, which we have authenticated, I forgot that we did that. In here, what is set up is in this PC, we are connected to this HackMe share that we talked about earlier. How this was set up was a little bit different though. And this is lazy admin, but I've seen it done. I've seen it done multiple times. You come in here to map a network drive and you want to put it to a location. Let's say instead of giving the user permission, you're just like, oh, forget about it. I'll just reconnect at sign in using my credentials. Who cares? Yeah. Oh, yeah. So if you use the domain admin credential or the help desk credential or whatever may have access, you connect to that share. Guess what? Every time you log into that share, that password is getting stored in memory in clear text. That's one way to just kind of see things. But yes, we can store whoever's logged in, we can get their hash. This hash, just like any other hash, we can pass this around the network now. Doesn't matter. We've captured that. So anytime we have that NTLM hash, we're good to go anytime we see that. So pretty crazy, easy attack to do as well. And yes, this is very real world. I bounce around from where do I have access? What secrets can I dump? How can I find info? Okay, move to the next machine. Same thing. What can I get and where can I go? And hardly ever do I need to pop a shell to do that. Let's talk mitigation on this. We'll wait for that to shut down. So we can't always prevent this, but we can do a lot of things to make the life of an attacker difficult. We talked about LAPS, the local administrator password solution. So what that does essentially is it generates a local admin password that is completely random to that machine. And so you don't have the same local admin password across all your machines. You have a unique one for everyone.
Yeah.
This takes like 4 hours to set up. It's not a long thing. It can be done in a day. And there is a great article here that I've linked in for Lazy Admin that does a great job of how to set it up, everything else. Again, we've talked about limiting the account reuse, so avoiding reusing local admin passwords, disabling your guest and administrator accounts, restricting who is your local admin, so least privilege concept, strong passwords, and privileged access management, again, like CyberArk, something like that, will help with this type of stuff. So all these are best practices. You're going to hear kind of the same thing over and over for a lot of these, but hopefully you get the message on that.
Got to ask you a question, Heath, maybe a bit of a curveball, but real world versus CTFs. I've seen with your training, it's a lot of real world stuff. Is it worth doing CTFs? How does it compare to what you're seeing out there?
Good question. So if you look at a Venn diagram, there's overlap, but each has their own place. And so with the CTF, you may pull off any of these attacks that I show you, but it's not going to be in a realistic way. It's not going to be in a way that you come across in the real world. It's going to be something that takes you some long, convoluted way that won't get you there. But the cool thing is you learn the attack. And there are really nice things about doing CTFs, like just logic challenges, problem solving. I think that helps. Working in teams helps. So there's benefits over there, even though it's not practical, to doing those if you have the time and you enjoy it. If you don't enjoy it, don't feel like you need to go do CTFs to be successful in the real world. Again, there's people that are really good at CTFs that probably couldn't do a pen test. And there's people really good at pen tests, I know for a fact, 'cause I'm one of them, that are not good at CTFs. And so there's that overlap there, but overall, you don't have to feel that you need to be successful in both to be a successful pen tester, for example.
I'm glad you said that, because it's always a worry. You always think, I got to do all these crazy CTFs, but it's like you said, it feels like it's just a challenge rather than being as aligned as it could be to the real world.
It is, and they're fun, but it doesn't correlate always. So next one. So this is our fifth and final attack today. And so this one is another one that is very, very easy to pull off, and all we need is a valid user account of any kind. So as long as we have credentials, which we have password 1 of for Frank Castle, which we're going to use, we can pull this attack off. So this attack is called Kerberoasting, and what we're going to do is we're going to abuse service accounts here. And so let's look at this chart here and kind of talk through what's happening. So we have this here where we request this TGT. Right? This is us authenticating with Frank Castle password 1. Basically, we're saying, hey, domain controller, I want to get from you a TGT. Here's my information. Cool. I got that TGT for you. Now, our domain controller is usually what's called a KDC as well, or a key distribution center. And what we're going to do for that is let's say we want to access this application server. It could be a SQL server. It could be whatever you want. And it's running a service over here. Well, for that service, I need what's called a TGS, or I like to just call a service ticket. So in order to get that service ticket, you have to present your ticket granting ticket. So you have to have a valid account in order to get that. You present that to your KDC or domain controller. This gets sent back to you. And what gets sent back to you is that service ticket with the account hash of the service.
Nice.
And so what you're supposed to do in the real world is you're supposed to just present this service ticket to the server and say, hey, here's the service ticket. And it'll decrypt that and say, yes or no, you have access, you don't have access, and give you that access if you have it. We're never going to present that ticket. We don't need to present that ticket. We're just going to take this hash offline and try to crack it. And so what that looks like is we can use this tool called Get User SPNs. SPNs are service principal names. So we're looking at services, and we are using our local Marvel.local Frank Castle user here. And we're just saying, here's my domain controller IP address. I want to request that information. Here you can see a service comes down that is a SQL service. Oh no, that member is part of the domain admin. So this is a big issue that we see. We see service accounts running as domain admins, and almost always they don't need to. Okay. And so we've got this service account running as domain admin. We get this nice long hash here. We take that hash. We already knew the password because we saw it in clear text earlier, but we crack it to my password 123#, and we are good to go. We now have a domain admin account, and it's really that easy. What we're going to see is an instance where a overly permissive account has a weak password, and we're able to capture and crack that fairly easily. Let's go ahead and do that. Same concept here. make sure this is running. So we just need a domain controller up. We don't necessarily need the other computers up and running. So we're going to say, hey, again, here's that credential that we got. Any credential will work as long as it's valid. Domain controller that we're pointing to, and then we're going to submit this request. Spits it out very quick. Now here it doesn't say that it's domain admin, but this user is absolutely domain admin. If we did our enumeration earlier, which we did, we saw the user was part of the domain admin. Again, I am concerned because this has never been logged into. So there is some concern that this could just be a honeypot account, especially in Kerberoasting. Why not? Okay, somebody's been compromised. An attacker probably will Kerberoast. Okay, if they do Kerberoast, then guess what? I'll just put an account in there that gets compromised, and I'll know as soon as that's logged into, sound the alarm. So this would be something of concern here. But in our example, we'll just go ahead and copy this hash that came through. And these are very slow hashes. So we won't send like massive word lists with rule sets attached to them and all that fun stuff. We're just gonna go with the basic word list on this as well. Guess I don't have a curb here. Okay, so we'll nano curb.txt. Yeah, have an empty file. Okay. So as always, I'm going to cat it out. Just make sure I put it in there correctly. Yes. Okay, so now all we're going to do is we're going to use hashcat one more time. And for this, we are 13.1000. Call it curb. Okay, same word list, rocky.txt. I probably wouldn't use this in the real world. I probably use that 2021 and just see what happens.
Yeah.
You could potentially use Rocky with the rule set here, but again, these are very slow hashes. Okay, it's going to try to crack. Might take just a second, and then we should get that password here. There we go. Okay, so it did crack to my password 123#. What's great about this password is it meets all the requirements you'd ever want. Capital letter, lowercase letter, number, special character, 14 characters.
Yeah.
But it's still a terrible password and easily cracked. So just because you're meeting all the criteria does not mean that's a good password.
Yeah.
So if you take anything away from this, even from personal security, please make sure you're using good passwords. Okay, let's talk about defenses for this really quick. Okay, so mitigation, strong passwords, least privilege helps. And group managed service accounts. So you can actually apply that to your service accounts, and that will significantly limit the ability to do this kind of attack. So again, there's a link for you from Microsoft directly on how to set that up. You should definitely set that up. We can also do some detection on this if you want to. So if somebody does perform a Kerberos attack in your network, just pulling down those hashes, you can detect that. And so we can enable logging in our group policy. And then we are looking for a couple things. So we should filter on 0x0 and 0x17 encryption type. So failure code and encryption type here. We want to make sure that we're pulling down on this event ID of 4769 and that we're not looking for KRB TGT because that will show up. And we're not looking for any machine. So anything with a $sign at the end of it. But anything else is fair game. If it comes across and it matches this criteria, it's likely that you're being Kerberoasted, and you can at least detect that and flag that because something is probably going on in your network. So those are the 5. I can pull some case studies, and we can kind of cover some real world stuff really quick.
Heath, I know you want to cover some real world stuff, but before we get there, default installation of Windows 80. Is it a terrible thing? Do you need to go and set a whole bunch of stuff to make it secure for the real world?
In my opinion, yeah. I mean, if an attacker lands on there, they've got a lot of options for you. Now, there are things that you can run with defaults, and you're probably fine if you're doing best practices elsewhere, but it's hard. If you're not doing best practices on your default install, I've got concerns about you having good passwords and you having secure things elsewhere. So yeah, like you want to make sure that you're at least implementing LLMNR protections, SMB signing, LDAP signing. You want to be doing account tiering, just general best practices, and I mean, literally 5-10 policies that can really change the game for your Active Directory environment and make you that much safer in an event of an attack. And then you can start layering on security. You can start layering on EDR, MDR, doing detection, response, that kind of thing. But just starting out, making sure you know the big attacks like we're seeing today and how those can affect you, that really does play a big part in security.
So if I'm like a Windows administrator and I look at what you've just demonstrated and I'm worried, can I reach out to you guys somewhere?
Yeah, absolutely. So for defense purposes, we have Breachpoint. So if you just go to breachpoint.com for offensive security, if you want this tested, That would be tcm-sec.com, or you can go to tcmsecurity.com, and that'll redirect you to the right place.
That's great. So you've got some real-world case studies, right, that you can show us?
I do, yeah. So I'm going to pull those up now. So we're going to pick on a couple of hospitals here, but we have a couple of case studies that we're going to look at. So this first case study is called "You Spent How Much on Security?"
Yep.
And we won't read the whole article, but we'll kind of go over a high level now that we understand some of what the attacks are that are out there. So this was an internal pen test, and this was against a large U.S. hospital. They were well funded. They had a lot of money invested in security measures. So IPv6 was disabled. That means we have no IPv6 available to us. Intrusion detection and prevention were on the devices, so we had to kind of skirt around those. CyberArk was in play, meaning that all user passwords were not user-generated. They were random generated passwords, very long, very complex. We were not cracking them. So basically, LLMNR is out of the equation here. And then they also had Symantec endpoint on all their devices. So patching was good. We don't have any patching to attack either. And so we kind of have to think through what we can do here. And so in this instance, what's really available to us from what we've shown so far, SMB Relay. We don't have LLMNR, but doesn't mean that we can't take that hash and then relay that hash and maybe get access to something. So if we scroll down just a little bit, you could see that, in fact, we did perform a successful relay attack here in this environment. And so what we can see if we scroll down is we have an administrator user. We don't worry about the defaults again. We've got a couple user 2, user 3, tech supports, and then admin. And what I want you to take away is, remember, hashes will be the same if the password is the same. So administrator ending in 15379, tech support 2 ending in 15379. These two user accounts have the same password hash. And then we also have this hash here, which was completely unique to this admin account. So they've got a lot of different support accounts and administrator accounts, and they're all using the same password. And you can probably already see where this is going. But here is taking a crack map exec with this password. So I did crack the password, and it's been years. It's fine to share the password. It was Power 10. It was not good. And so the tech support account was the one that was on every single computer. The administrator password was here or there, but this tech support almost everywhere. Hey, look, pwn. Wow. Every single machine. We still do not have a domain user. We just have local users. And so this is that power of finding these accounts, these local accounts, and cracking this password was beneficial because it was also the password to disable Symantec on the endpoints. So reuse everywhere. And so what eventually happened was we continued passing around, and until we found a user that was local to a machine that also ended up working locally on a domain controller. So this whole time, we did not touch any domain account. It was all local, did not need to drop shell, except for this one instance of dropping shell here to prove concept. That was it. So Very easy, very quick to do, right? And so, hey, enable SMB signing, disable LLMNR, least privilege, account tiering, don't reuse passwords. These are all things we've talked about today. It all comes into play, real world scenario here.
And they spend millions.
Millions. But they spent millions on domain security. And so they forgot about local security, which is just as important in your domain. So next one is digging deep. And so we got another hospital here. And I think this is the one you may have been alluding to, David, earlier. So we have a large U.S. hospital. It's well funded again, same concept. This time, though, LLMNR and IPv6 are disabled. SMB signing is enabled. Intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, patching's good. So we do not have a way in from today of what we saw. Like all those initial attacks are just gone. Yeah. So when initial attacks are gone, we have to start thinking outside the box. I like looking at default credentials, and I have been able to get domain controller access off of printers before, off of just like different logins and being able to guess passwords, those things. And so we start to look for what is potentially out there outside of patching issues and other vulnerabilities. And so what ended up happening on this one is, yes, they were demoing some software. And the software here had default credentials on it. And for whatever reason, this local admin password was sitting here in clear text. It wasn't bulleted out or asterisked out, right? So we've got a password. We don't know where it goes. We don't know any accounts or anything to it. So what do I think about doing first? Well, why not use crack map exec and just see if it works? And so in this instance, we sweep a subnet. This is real world, right? We saw this earlier. Administrator user. I just guessed what user it could be. There's the password, -- local. The syntax has changed a little bit from this pen test, but here you can see we pwned one machine. Out of all these, all we got was one. And sometimes one is enough because we can then take a secrets dump on that machine using the hash that we have or the password that we have, and we get this password hash. But now, guess what? It's that same password, but now we know a new user, and we have this blank admin user. And so this user, we were able to then take and pass around, and guess what? That worked everywhere.
Wow.
And eventually, we talked about W Digest earlier. You keep passing it around, you keep looking for credentials in clear text. Eventually, we found a service account that had this password here. And that password allowed us, again, these have all been changed. This is an older pen test. That allowed us here to log into this domain controller as this IS setup user and compromise the domain. Same concept. No default creds. Turn off W Digest if you're using Windows 7 or 8 or 2012 R2 in your network or earlier. Don't give your service accounts domain admin access, right? If we didn't find it through an account, we would have found it through Kerberoasting, and we would have maybe cracked that password. And again, don't reuse your passwords, especially your local passwords.
I love it. I'm glad that you showed some real world stuff because, it's the lab versus the real world. And that's the thing about CTFs that we discussed earlier. It's nice to do stuff, but better to get the real world. Sorry, go on.
No, yeah. Everything you saw today is everything literally we will do on a pen test. Like there's nothing that you saw that is CTF based at all. It is all practical. It all applies. And you can take that and use that as a pen tester. You could take that and use that as a defender, and it's all applicable to modern Active Directory.
So I actually wrote the question down, and you used that word modern, so I want to latch onto that. Windows versions out there in the wild, Windows 7, Windows 8. Do you still get these old Windows versions, or is everyone on Windows 11? Sorry, go on.
No, we saw. We saw ME recently. And so And there's just there's places like hospitals, for example, that have this legacy software that's out there and they can't do anything. They can't update it. And so they're stuck on whatever version of Windows from way back when, and they just can't do anything. So you have to isolate those or do something different with those and make sure they don't tie to anything else in the network. Sometimes you have to accept risk. It's depending on what you're doing. But yeah, we still see very old versions of Windows that are out there and not managed.
I'm glad you said that because, again, it's the YouTube world versus the real world. In YouTube, when you show old hacks, people say this will never happen in the real world. So I'm really glad that you said that.
Oh, we see every hack that has been demonstrated. I've probably seen at least from a exploit, remote code execution, known patching issue. Yes. Now, when it gets into CTF, I think of privilege escalation on local escalation. There's no need to necessarily do that on a pen test. It's cool if you got access to a computer and you need to elevate privileges, but in a pen test, most of the time you're already dealing with somebody that's an admin on that machine. And so you don't need to elevate privileges higher. It's usually how it works unless you're compromising through a web server or something else. So the chances that it comes up are a lot lower. But yes, there's plenty of opportunities to do what you saw today.
I think the question a lot of people will have, and you've mentioned it, but I just want to make it clear. How did you get access into the internal network? Because again, YouTube comments is this is dumb. It means you have to be local there. Someone has to drive to the location and plug in a cable.
Yeah, no, this is accurate. This is a laptop sent to do the pen test. Now, this doesn't mean that obviously attackers are doing laptop drops, but they may go attach a rogue device to your network. And if you're not detecting rogue devices, which a lot of companies are not, how are you going to know it's there? They may break in through phishing and get into somebody's workstation with malware, and then they have access on the machine. And so there's plenty of ways to envision how this could happen. Yes, it's not as dangerous as external facing assets, but internal assets. The way I like to think about this is we spend so much time, it's like a house. We spend so much time on the outside of the house. So patching, making sure no default credentials, all this stuff. And so your house, you've got locks, you've got maybe dogs, you've got lights, security cameras, all these things for the intruder outside. What happens when they get inside? Some of your doors don't even have locks on them, or they might have that little pin that you just poke a pin through and you pop the lock. And so that's kind of internals as well. We don't spend as much time focusing on the security, but if somebody does get through the perimeter, compromising your assets internally is very, very dangerous. And so you want to make sure to protect those assets inside. It's like having a safe or having something inside your house to have that extra additional safeguard to make sure that you're, even if somebody does get through, they're not going to get anywhere.
And I'm glad you mentioned phishing because it happens so often, right?
It does. Yeah. I mean, the users are going to always be the weakest point of an enterprise. And so phishing, voice phishing is very, very big right now. Smishing for texting, it's all very prominent. And sophisticated attackers will make it difficult. Even for us, we are well-trained security professionals. We had an email about a month ago that got a lot of us to think about it. Like, we determined it was a fish, but at least it made us think because it was well thought out. It knew our architecture, it knew some of the things behind it, and it was very well crafted, but we were still able to detect it being security people. If we were not security minded, that was a very dangerous email. And so that's where training becomes very important.
Heath, this is amazing what you've demonstrated. But, where do I go if I want to get started? Because you've kind of like given us some cool stuff, but, is it, again, going to the TCM Academy website? Where do I get started?
Yeah, so we've got a lot of different places. We realize that not everybody can afford training. So our YouTube channel is The Cyber Mentor. You go there, we have a full courses area. We've got the first 15 hours of our practical ethical hacking course completely free online. It's on YouTube, and so you can check it out there. We've got a lot of other content, like we've got a full Python course on YouTube. We've got OSINT course on YouTube, escalation courses, web hacking courses, all kinds of stuff for free. So if you can't afford it, don't want to pay for it, perfectly fine. Even if you just want to test this out and see how the training is. From there, if you are interested, we have a subscription plan that is through our academy. So that is academy.tcm-sec.com. That will take you to our academy there. We've got 20 or so courses ranging from offensive security, defensive security. We've got a bunch of fun stuff in between. We've even got those foundational courses, programming, everything. And then we've got our certifications. So if you want to test out your knowledge, we've got the certifications.tcm-sec.com. And all of our exams are completely hands-on, completely practical. You're going to be tested on what you would expect to be tested on in a real-world scenario. You have to deliver a report. It's very, very, very practical. And other than that, if you want to come hang out, we do have a Discord community. So if you go to discord.gg/TCM, that'll take you to our Discord community. You can chat with like-minded professionals interested in offensive or defensive security.
Heath, I really want to thank you for sharing and giving back to the community. You've taken your courses and put so much of it online for people who can't afford it. But then you've also, got the certs for people who want to prove their knowledge. It's one thing to watch YouTube videos, but it's a different thing to get a cert. So thanks so much for giving so much to the community.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And thanks so much for your time today. It was really good getting to sit here and hang out with you for a couple hours.
It's been brilliant. Thanks so much for sharing. For everyone who's watching, please look at the links below. I've put a bunch of links below to the links that were mentioned and extra stuff. Heath's written some great articles going through some of this in more detail on his website, so I'll link those below. Heath, again, thanks so much.